And then in that transition is the shadow to spirit work, is how to use shadow directly as a mystical awakening from in any program, but utilizing these advanced shamanic techniques.
Welcome to the Mystics Rising podcast. I'm Jen Riley, and I'm so excited to share with you this episode. Shadow work has been one of the most transformational inner journeys that I have experienced in my life. Shadow are these parts of ourselves that are playing out in our lives that we can't see. It's the parts of our subconscious that are playing out our childhood traumas, our unhealthy belief systems, and it shows up in our lives as triggers. And I absolutely, prior to understanding what shadow even was, I thought that I could, muscle over my triggers. I could muscle over the shadow. I could, I'm going to push through it and control and suppress my inner being. And through shadow work, I've completely illuminated and built this process of how to build awareness and how to untwine these unhealed parts of myself. And through going into the depth of my being and integrating these pieces of myself, I've simultaneously expanded my consciousness and awakening, and in a way that I didn't know was possible. I'm so excited to share with you Kim Barta. Kim is an author, a therapist, the co-founder of Stages International, an adult development model, and he is also my shadow work teacher. Kim has developed this amazing program of shadow work that he has cultivated through the intersections of shamanism, psychotherapy, and vertical development. Kim is launching a new program called Shadow and Light that combines his shadow work program with also these developmental meditations that he has cultivated in his program that really help flesh out your consciousness at each developmental stage. You can use the code Mystics Rising to get a $1,000 discount off of his upcoming year-long journey. And in this episode, we are going to explore shadow work, shamanism, the history of shamanism, and these universal principles that are really illuminating and advancing psychotherapy. Wow, Kim, welcome to the Mystics Rising podcast. I'm excited to have Kim Barta on the show today. I guess I'd love to, maybe hear a little bit. I know a little bit that there's been this kind of culmination of psychotherapy, shamanism, and vertical development. And I'd love to hear a little bit about maybe your awakening into the work that you're bringing forth into the world, and how like shamanism and psychotherapy, how that maybe all how did that all come together, I guess?
Thank you, Jen. Well, first of all, it's nice being here with you, Jen, and really appreciate you. And I'm celebrating your launch of this beautiful Mystic Rising idea. It's a beautiful thing to bring into the world, and I'm so glad that you're here bringing it in. So, to answer your question, it's a good question, and our self-understanding of ourselves is our own narration. It's not necessarily accurate, but I can give you the best that I can. When I went into psychotherapy, I actually hadn't even planned on going into psychotherapy. I had an undergrad in cultural anthropology. I graduated in the fall. I thought, I'll get into a master's program in psychotherapy and I'll just use it for myself for personal growth. I never planned on actually being a psychotherapist. But as it turned out, I seemed to excel really well in the program. I had this uncanny knack for some reason for helping people, and even my fellow students would come to me when we were like in the when we had to work with clients for free, and they go to the professors, and then they come to me, and then I'd say, well, try this, and then they would try it and it would work. And so it was an interesting thing that started happening where some of the students were coming to me as a fellow student, as a peer, for advice. And I don't know why that is, but I just seem to have this knack for really understanding the psychological dynamic going on inside other human beings. And it always comes from a deep place of love and care and compassion and clarity. When I did my master's program, I met a Native American shaman, and he took me in, and I lived with him for 6 months. And we did, different things. He showed me different things, trained me in different things. And that was a lovely experience. So when I did my thesis, what I actually did was I studied shamanism from around the world, not just a specific shamanic methodology, but or cultural presentation of it. And so I studied it around the world and distilled some basic foundational dynamics from it. And there's actually another person, I can't remember his name right now off the top, Michael, somebody who did that. So his book was really central to what I was working on. And then having more personal experiences and doing more study, I took that and I combined that with modern psychotherapy and distilled kind of a shamanic psychotherapy master's thesis out of that. And in that master's thesis, I actually predicted at the rate that psychology is progressing, that we might catch up to kind of the foundational elements of shamanism in about 25 to 30 years. And I'm glad to say we did. That prediction was actually dead on. About the time we're starting to really get some really, really high quality psychotherapy that we've never had before now. And not everybody understands it, but the point is that the wisdom is out there now. And one of the things that I really want to do is help share that wisdom to other professional helpers so that they can bring that on. And I haven't had the chance to really do that yet, but that's my ultimate vision, is to be able to really train people that are wanting to be helpers in this, what I call shadow to spirit orientation. It works with the deep authenticity of our shadow and combines it with a spiritual awakening dynamic. And then in that transition is the shadow to spirit work, is how to use shadow directly as a mystical awakening from in any program, but utilizing these advanced shamanic techniques. The thing about shamanism is that it's a broad field. So there's the medicinal shamanism, there's the herbal shamanism, and then there's the psychotherapy shamanism. And a lot of times those are not sorted out. And so what I'm really talking about here is the truly advanced psychotherapy that shamans created, because they didn't have penicillin. They didn't have a lot. They did have herbs, and very good herbs that work, and in many cases better than modern medicine does, but in some cases not also. And so they really had to rely on advanced psychospiritual dynamics to help people heal, to augment the natural healing response in humanity in the people that they work with. And they really did develop very sophisticated skills that psychotherapy just didn't even have a clue about. 25, 30 years ago. And now they're starting to wake up and get a clue. And so I'm very excited about this. I really think our world is moving to a really beautiful place where we can do some really profound healing in really short periods of time. And I've been doing this for 30 years, doing trauma work, people that have been raped, sexually abused, undergone incredible trauma, and literally in one session, having them go from trauma to just blissful experiences. And if we could all work, even if we could work that fast, we could really heal a lot of trauma in the world. And we could really help people move to that passionate place in their own world, in their own life, in really clear ways that aren't hindered by these trauma responses and shadow issues and different things like that. So the idea is to really get this out there in the world so that people can really live these beautiful lives that they can live.
Curious, Kim, you said this like ancient wisdom, which I appreciate so much. I've studied a lot of different types of shamanism, and it's really interesting because I know it in most cultures that have a shaman, anytime there were traumatic events, there was like a person in the community who was dedicated to being with people in their community in times of trauma to help with this processing and metabolizing of the trauma. And I'm curious if there was like a principle or advice from your experience with shamanism for professional helpers. Like what is that piece that you want to see more incorporated in the world?
Well, the low-hanging fruit, so to speak, from that one is, of course, the unconditional loving witness. And a lot of psychotherapists and helpers really come from that place already. They have this, this loving presence, this unconditional love. But ironically, despite that, in my work, because I did do some training, we have a coaching augmentation program through stages, and professionals from around the world, regardless of degree, from PhD to people that don't even have a degree necessarily, they just really wanted to be a part of this. We tend to project on other people, and they would project upon their clients. So the heart was there, but the clarity wasn't. They thought they were clear, but we had videotapes, and we would show them in the videotape, look, this is where you projected on your client. This is where you projected on your client. This is where you projected on your client. And there's an astounding amount of projection that goes on because of lack of true understanding of our own shadow issues. So one of the really important things, I think, for the healing profession is to really get your shadow issues clear. And the thing is that projections seem to be the ones that are the hardest for people to get. They seem to have a hard time with that. And so they get parts work, but they have a hard time really dropping into, they can see other people projecting on them, but have a hard time going, oh, I just projected on somebody. And to turn that around and really see that. And so that's what we did in our training, was to show people how you're projecting on clients. And one of the important things is to get the projections out of the way. If you come from the unconditional loving witness and don't project, you will improve your practice dramatically. And then we can start working on the more shamanic skills from there.
I know just from my experience with stages, and this is, I've often thought of this too, because you can, at any stage of development, you can still get your degree in your license and become a therapist.
Exactly.
But there's no level of testing to see where you are developmentally, because I believe in the stages model, there's a certain level of development where you begin to really see projections. And so I'm curious if you want to maybe elaborate a little bit more about, like, how do you work with people to, I mean, you can start showing them their projections, but how do you work with people to start growing up their consciousness and bring more awareness to projections?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jen. So when the kind of rule of thumb of development is to meet people right at the developmental level that they're at, and then to offer little glimpses into the very next stage. If you hop too far ahead, you're just talking over the head, there's no connection here. So one of the things that I loved doing when I was working in private practice than I am now, I'm still a little bit in private practice, but like I loved working with the entire age range, the entire developmental span of humanity. And so I'd have babies in the room, I'd have little kids in the room, toddlers, and all the way up through the developmental levels. And I just love diving in with each one of them and really entering into their consciousness. I mean, that's really, I think, the shamanic trick and the trick that we all want to do. I don't know if trick's the right word, but the idea is to be able to really enter into the consciousness of another person and really become that same shape of consciousness. And then when you become that same shape of consciousness, you can feel the pain, you can feel the joy, you can feel the resources. You don't just assess them from the outside. You are in it and living it. And from that lived embodied place with the person, and having your own wisdom on as well, observing that, you can feel the smooth flow out of there in a much more organic way than trying to apply a technique. And so that's one of the key things, I think. And so I'd love just entering into the consciousness of each being that was in front of me and with me, and feeling that shape of consciousness, experiencing it, and then working my way out in the flow. And then I knew I could feel the flow of what it would take to bring them through. And anytime it didn't come organically flowing from them, then I knew that I did not enter into their shape of consciousness accurately.
Wow.
So in other words, if the healing process isn't just a natural fluid flow, then I did not get their shape of consciousness right. Wow. So that I'd go back in and get the shape of consciousness. What is that shape of consciousness? Where am I missing that? Oh, there it is, and then I could feel the fluid way to move through that. And so it's a different way of looking at the healing profession than I'm trained, here's my skills, this is what I'm going to do, here's the techniques I'm going to apply. Or the other popular version, which is I am coming from unconditional love, I'm going to hold space for you, right? And that's good. No complaint about that. It's not as efficient, but it's a beautiful space that people can just drop into depth with. And,
Yeah, it's really powerful. I mean, just having safe space is like an unconditional. I've actually been just awakened to how few people have had access to true unconditional love, and how deeply transformational like a container of unconditional love can be in and of itself.
In and of itself. Yeah.
I'm just really loving this awareness that you have of people's consciousness, and I want to say fearlessness to go in and be with, and also know that you can pull out. Because I think one of my something I became aware of, it was fear in me of being maybe stuck, and I think that there's a cultural shadow around positive vibes only. I don't want to be around toxicity, and almost like wanting to have a like I'll help you, but I want this barrier to protect myself. And so not allowing to enter into this, the consciousness of someone else, or really feel into there. And I'm curious, how did that develop in your practice? Like, how did you find your way into being able to hold space, go in there and pull yourself back out?
I think that there's several really important skills to develop to do that, because you're right. The fear is actually a good thing in a way, in that if you have the fear, it means you're not ready to do that, right? You don't have the skills to do it, and you can get lost in other people's toxicity. You can absorb it, and it can become a problem. And shamans develop techniques for doing that, which I practice, and then I've developed some additional ones on my own. But one of the things is, if just on a human level, not even a shamanic level, but on a human level, not that shamanism isn't human, but I mean this more in just like an everyday skill level. Okay, so three main things: clarity of boundaries, a skillful capacity to move in and out of different shapes of consciousness, and a clear sense of your own identity. So if I am really clear in who I am, and I have my own personal power inside of me, I'm not projecting my power out, it's not leaking out in different ways. Okay. And that's amazingly common in this world, how we're leaking energy. Anytime we project, we leak energy, actually. And of course, what we said earlier is, when people tend to not see the projections, they tend to see everything else faster. But seeing your own projections tends to come on a lot later in one's development. And so if you don't, projections are actually how we leak our energy. And so when you actually see your projections and can re-own them, your energy isn't leaking out anymore. And if you're actually fully present with your own vital energy, you can go in anywhere and you won't absorb the toxicity. You can feel it, you can shape yourself, you can do all these things, but you know that you're not, you know that you've got your vital essence no matter what. And so now you have your vital essence, your vital energy, you have your skillful means, you have to actually have the skills to go in and out and move around. And you have your deep presence that allows that. Oh, you have your clear boundaries. So when I'm entering into another consciousness, what I'm doing is I'm actually erasing boundaries for a moment, but my sense of identity and my skillful means holds that. And then as I move back out, I have my clear boundaries with me before I enter in and work with the other person, so that I'm not creating a transference of some kind of piece there, but I've journeyed it already. So I know the journey intuitively, and I can feel that. And then so I can provide those little stepping stones. Remember how we talked about meet somebody right where they're at and provide the next step? On a developmental, that's true, but on also any healing process, that's true. You got to meet the person right where they're at, because I can throw techniques at people all over the place, but if it's not where they're at, then it's not going to work. I had one psychologist, when you get a client that's been to another healer, another practitioner, another psychologist, it's common to ask permission to be able to contact them, so that you can get information from them about what they've tried, what worked, what didn't work. Why did the person not stay with them, in other words? And then you don't repeat the same problem. Okay. And that's amazingly not done very much, but I would do it all the time, because I would just ask permission, so that I could really see, what did the other person do that didn't work for this particular client? Because I don't want to reinvent the wheel. I want my client to have a really good experience. I want them to have a healing experience. So if I know what didn't work, I'm not going to do that. And I had one psychologist say, "Oh yeah, they're a treatment failure." And I go,
wow.
What?
That
You know,
hurts,
right?
yeah.
That hurts, doesn't it? They were a treatment failure. And I go, what do you mean they were a treatment failure? Well, I ran them through the protocol and it didn't work. So they're a treatment failure.
Wow.
Right? So there are many practitioners out there that learn a skill and they run people through their protocol. And if they don't work, then the person is a treatment failure. And, that's almost the exact opposite of the way I work. And so, so anyway, just taking that, I've noticed many subtle versions of that, though. People don't necessarily call their clients a treatment failure, but they do have a protocol and they run them through the protocol. And if it doesn't work, they run them through the protocol again. If it doesn't work, they run them through the protocol again.
So that's the definition. Yeah.
Because that's what they know.
Definition of insanity, right? Trying something and get a different outcome.
Yeah. And they're coming from a beautiful, heartfelt place. They really want to help, but they're not seeing that, oh, I need to meet the person where they are and apply skills that are right for that person right here, right now. You can kind of look at it this way. Let's say I want to get to New York City. And so I'm in Florida and I'm telling my client the way you get to New York City is you head straight north and just follow it right up and you're going to get really close to New York City. The problem is my client's in LA. So they go straight north and they end up in Alaska.
That's very different than New York.
Yeah, they're looking around for New York. There's no New York. So the same thing happens psychologically is a lot of times I notice as healers, and this is going to your question, what is my recommendation for healers, is to realize that the client that you're working with is not really where you're at. And on a subtle level, on a psychological level, a lot of times that's really actually a trickier thing than a lot of people realize. I need to really, really notice where the person is, because if I'm just running them through a protocol, I'm not meeting them where they're at. So you have the protocol people and you have the holding space people, okay? And so you have this beautiful holding space people, which is great. It's a healing environment. It's amazingly healing. If you can just do it clearly without projecting, it's healing in and of itself, and profoundly so. And then you have the protocol people, which if you hit it right, can be very efficient and effective and very helpful. And people are very grateful. If you hit it wrong, you're hurting people. And so the idea is to take these two skillful means, but lots of different skillful means, and from multiple different angles of consciousness, from multiple different developmental levels. And this beautiful holding space, unconditional loving witness. Right? So you create the environment of this unconditional loving witness, and then you have all these plethora of skillful means that you can apply. And so from the unconditional loving witness now, instead of just holding space, I hold the space, but I can also enter into the consciousness of the other person, feel the fluid movement out, come back out and apply the skillful means in these just very delicate ways that just the client doesn't even realize they're being worked on. And it just fluidly moves them through the healing place to a place of wonder. And it's such a delight to watch this happen. Such a delight, because you get these people that have just been in trauma, in depression and anxiety and all these places for so long. And then they get this awakening in just one session. And they're just in this blissful place and very happy and can't believe that it happened so quickly. And then they go into kind of a grief, a really profound grief, because, oh, if it was this easy, why didn't I do this before? Right? Why didn't I do this before? What was going on? You know, I worked so hard. I spent all these years and I've lost all these years of my life, you know. It's like, no, you know, that it's understandable. You were lost. That's why you go to a helper, you know, and that's why it's here. So what I want you to do is take all this grief that's for your lost years, and keep in mind that normal grief is about losing something that you're never going to have again in the future. This grief is about losing something you never wanted.
Wow. Yeah.
Right? But you had all this time. So you can't treat it like normal grief. You actually go backwards if you treat it like normal grief. You actually harm your client. So you have to reverse the process in a sense and lead them from, you know, the energy that's going to this grief. Like if somebody's going through genuine normal grief, you have to help them develop the skill to hold that grief. And with this grief, what you actually need to do is convert the grief right back into their awakening.
That's beautiful. It's fine. I know I've experienced this when I got into your shadow work program.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, how?
Yeah. So this is where templates get in the way, right? So many people operate off of templates when they're healing. And the template can actually cause harm if you're not deeply understanding the consciousness of the person that you're with.
Yeah, the template's almost, it's like safe. It's like, if I don't know exactly what to do, I can fall into this, and then the safety is external to me. It's not I trust myself. It's I can trust something outside of myself. And then again, how do you create authentic connection when you're connecting through something that you've created outside of yourself? So, gosh, Kim, how did you come into this awareness? Like, what was your, like, do you remember like the first time that you had the awareness that you had the capacity to go into someone else's consciousness? Was it scary? What was that like for you?
Actually, this is a funny story, and it's going to blow away all my, image of somebody at a later developmental level. But actually, I learned it on the farm with cows on the range.
Please continue.
And I learned it with my dog. So here's the fun story. When I was 12, I was raised on a farm with 6 brothers and sisters. There's 7 of us, and the 3 sisters were the oldest, then the 3 brothers, and then me, which, okay, I know I put myself in a separate category there. There's a reason for that. Because they were all, anywhere from 6 years to 18 years older than me. Okay. And so there was this big gap, and then, oops, Kim came along, and so what happened was, the 3 boys, they were, 6 to 10 years older than me. And so Dad had them really working on the farm, and the farm was running really well. And the ranch and farm, it's a diversified country experience. And so by the time they graduated, all of a sudden there was nobody except for little old Kim at 12 years old, right? He just got through having these full-grown young men running the farm with him, and all of a sudden there was Kim. And that was a bit of a challenge. So all of a sudden, I had some training on the farm, but not the degree that my brothers did. Suddenly we were rounding up all the cattle ourselves, right? And moving them from one place to another. And frankly, all it takes is one cow to stray off, and all of a sudden the herd's all over the place, right? And how do you get them where they need to go? And so I started learning to I could start picking out which cows were those ones that were going to start dividing the herd. And I could tell from just subtle movements in their being that they were doing that. And so what I was doing as a 12 and 13-year-old was I was going, because I was tired of running all over the place chasing cows, right? It took a lot of time and energy. And so what I started doing is, oh, look, this cow is they're not straying from the herd, but they turn their head just a little bit to look at me, and they had a certain look in their eye. And it was like, that cow is planning, the cows will turn their head, but they have a different essence to them when they're turning their head versus when they're turning their head to check something out, right? And so what I started learning to do is I would just move to the left side of the herd if that one particular cow that would divide the herd would do there. And then they go, oh, that's not good. That's not a good. So they would just come back into the herd and then follow the herd. And then I just started refining that so that I didn't have to run to the left side of the herd or to the right side of the herd. I just do a gesture like this and right in their eye. Just move my head a little bit to the left and look right in their eye, and they would just turn back in. And so that was my first foray into really entering into the consciousness of another sentient being. Was this cow was going to do that. And the point is, if the cow did that, they weren't going to get to where their next feed was going to be. So it was actually compassionate for the cow. The cow was going to end up running all over the place, getting all upset and disturbed, and then ending up with no food, right? So, and they just didn't know that, right? Because they were just going, what's going on? We're being moved. And cows don't like to be moved. They like to, just, be where they're at and enjoy their life. So it's an act of compassion for the cow as well as an act of compassion for me. And it really made things work really well. So that was my first foray into that. And then, and from there, I think that as a young kid going through teenage years, I just learned to start applying that socially. And then by the time I got into my master's program, which I had no plan on being in as a profession, that skill was just so honed at that point that I just naturally knew how to move in and out of different people's consciousnesses. And then working with actually going into private practice and working on the Native American reservation with severe multi-generational trauma. I just honed that skill more and more so that I could go into greater levels of disturbance and be at peace with that. I could enter into it, feel the shape of it, hold it, embody it, but still be in this very calm, stable, unconditional, loving witness place. And so that's the other aspect of going into this is, at first, when you enter into other people's trauma, it can be very traumatizing. But after 30 years of doing it, for me, it's not. It's just you hold this sacred space regardless of the level of disturbance or bliss. And so if you can hold this sacred space, this unconditional loving witness space, regardless of the high or the low that a person is in, then that helps.
Wow. I love that story. That's an amazing awareness to have at such a young age.
Oh, thank you. It was, the thing is, looking back on it, it's different than at the time. At the time, I was like, I got to figure out a solution here because Dad was like pushing 70. And I was 13, right? And the farm had been basically run by my three brothers mostly, at that point. I mean, Dad was kind of the, this is how you do it, but he didn't have to do so much. So suddenly he had to do more and I had to catch up. So, yeah. So it was kind of born out of, what they say, the necessity is the mother of invention. And it certainly was in that case.
Yeah, I think that's something you share in vertical development, that you keep hitting the wall until you need to come up with another level of consciousness to solve your problems. So yeah, that's a beautiful example.
Yeah. And I love when you brought up development. So one of my favorite ones, because we can all kind of relate to being a toddler, because we were all a toddler at one point. But this story helps us understand a little bit about vertical development, because people don't quite understand it. They go, yeah, we grow up and we kind of grow up, but we're kind of the same person. And we kind of forget. It's amazing. Even at late developmental levels, it's amazing how quickly people forget that they weren't always this way. Mm. And so this story helps us understand that a little bit. So imagine being a toddler that's just running around. You just passionate, excited, digging the pots and pans out of the cupboards and banging on them, whatever you're doing, right? You're just running around. The toddlers, and you can go watch this in toddlers, if they want something, they'll just come up and take it out of your hand, right? And if you hang on, then they'll pull harder, and if that doesn't work, they might hit you to distract you and get it, or they might cry and scream and throw a temper tantrum. All kinds of things will happen. Well, your mother, you know this, right? You probably
This well, yep.
This is normal childhood development, And so what's happening is the child is in first person perspective and they really see the world through their own eyes. So if they want something, that's the only want there is in the world.
Right.
They don't really realize that this other person has a want too. This is called theory of mind. When we realize other people have wants, other people have minds, it's called theory of mind. It's well known in childhood development. So you can look that up, anybody who's listening. So anyway, what happens is they want the toy. They want what they want, whatever it is. They want what they want. They want the toy. They want the toy. And they'll do anything to get the toy. And if they can't, it's just absolutely distraught. It's just crying, anger, sadness, sometimes fear, all kinds of things comes up for them. Okay. And this is actually the trauma of an existential issue. And the existential issues, in my point of view, is when our conscious development is butting up against a new developmental level and we can't figure it out. We can't figure it out. And so there's this butting up against this. And that butting up against is the reality that other people have minds for our toddlers, that other people have wants and needs and minds. And so they start setting boundaries. And then the boundary, they butt up against the boundary, and they can't figure it out. They try to manipulate through it. They try to hit through it. They try to scream through it. They try to cry through it. They try every possible means at their disposal to get through it, and it doesn't work. In a healthy parenting situation, it doesn't work. Otherwise, we grow up narcissists, because that's what first person perspective is narcissism. Okay. And we all have narcissism inside of us. We all have a first person perspective. That's okay. We can be okay with that, but what happens is if the parent gives in, then the narcissism gets to grow up through the developmental levels. But the parent holds the boundary in a good, healthy parenting situation. And what happens is they can't figure it out. And finally, they get theory of mind. Oh, they have a mind just like I do. They have wants just like I do. They have thoughts just like I do. They have desires just like I do. That's what's going on. And all of a sudden, a whole new world opens up to them that they never saw before. And it's amazing because a lot of parents, every parent has gone through this. But when they look at their toddlers having temper tantrums, a vast majority of parents think, oh, they need discipline, and I just disciplined it out of them. That's not what happened. Oof. Right?
Yeah.
And so we've got a huge, I would say the vast majority of parents see it that way. Okay. That, oh, they had this, I just disciplined it out of them, and now they learn to be good.
Right.
And what really needed
to happen, suppression. Yeah.
Right. But what we really need to do is we do need to hold the boundaries. And there is a discipline in holding the boundaries. But the idea isn't that I have to discipline it out of them. I need to hold the boundaries so that they can throw their temper tantrums, get all upset and frustrated, and not rescue them, so that they can get theory of mind. And once they get theory of mind, notice it's actually a different mind, because now they don't care about the toy. They care about the friend. And they're not trying to solve the old problem. The old problem is not a problem anymore. It's not how do I get the toy? New problem is how do I create friendship? And that's a much more sophisticated and alive process.
I love this so much. I forget what workshop it is that you host, but there's this practice of holding boundaries with love. Mm-hmm. And just how, I think, it's like, how can I just continuously show up? And I think parents often get very triggered in that space. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But to just hold the boundary with love, because it's like, no, you can say no with love.
Yes.
And to hold, I can hold you in your frustration. I can hold you in your anger, mm-hmm. and allow you to have all these emotions, mm-hmm. and to be deeply grounded in this place of, I think, understanding that boundaries push development.
That's right.
And that's helpful. I think that there's maybe even a lack of understanding of how boundaries can be helpful there.
Yeah. And that's the problem, because you have the people that say, I got to punish it out of them, and that leads to suppression. And then you have the people on the other side that need to coddle. Oh, I don't want my child feeling bad. And so they're always trying to rescue them from bad feelings. And then the child never learned that, they don't grow up. They get stuck there too. Both sides, the indulgent side and the punishing side, miss the mark and harms the child. And so, like you said, holding firm, clear, solid boundaries, standing in our own power, healthy power, firm, clear boundaries, but with loving presence. We don't have to get angry. We don't have to get upset. We just have to be firm and clear and solid in our boundaries. And natural development will take care of the rest on that developmental level, on that for that developmental transition.
Love
and
those.
several others too. Yeah.
I guess I'm curious. So, coming back to like helping professionals.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. I guess what's coming up for me is like the clarity piece. Like I'm appreciating so much of, there's so much healing that needs to be done, and so much growing up
Mm-hmm.
at all levels.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I'm curious, like how does one develop clarity? And is it just clarity for where they are, where they're at? And I guess if there was like advice for anyone on the spectrum listening to this, how would they begin to seek their own clarity?
Well, that's where shadow work does come in. That's where we go in and we really look inside. We go into our own personal hell, our own personal demons, and we hold that space. So let's grow this up a little bit. So we had the first person perspective, and the parent held the boundaries in a loving, sacred, loving, kind way. And they developed a whole new world, the world of friendship. But the world of friendship is wrought with some problems, because now I might get rejected. And now I got to figure out all this stuff. And now I can be chasing how to be accepted. And then that can lead to a lot of addictions. And as you know, a lot of addictions started in second person perspective 2.0 specifically. Most people that are addicted later in life got addicted in 2.0. Yeah. So we have this 1.5, 2.0 perspective. And this is that first person perspective and early second person perspective for people that don't understand the stages model. This 2.0 is I want friendships, but I haven't developed sacred principles yet. Okay. And what happens is when I start chasing friendships, chasing relationships, and trying to make them all okay and make them work and everything, I develop a great deal of anxiety. And then I actually end up blowing up my relationships a lot as well. Because I'm trying to please one person or the other. Or the other end of it is I start just being more like the dominant person. You need to meet me, right? And so then I get all the followers that'll follow me, and I end up being kind of like a bully or a leader. Not that we have any political precedents for that, but people might notice this kind of process going on in the political world in certain places. And so what happens is we need to develop sacred principles to hold that. Because if I live in a principled manner now, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to attract people that have principles rather than get sucked into whatever cult or dynamic is dragging me, is attracting me. Okay. I live by those sacred principles. So now my parent held boundaries on me, but now I'm holding boundaries on myself with my sacred principles. Okay. And now move up to fourth person perspective. What we're doing is, so we went from first to second, I'm skipping over third. Third person perspective, what we do is we start looking at things from an objective manner, but we're not necessarily deeply looking inside of ourselves, finding our deep, authentic self. So what we do in fourth person perspective is we start developing the skillful means to hold our own trauma. In third person perspective, a lot of times we're kind of throwing our trauma out onto the world a lot. A great place to look at this is politics is pretty rampant with this. If you take a look at the new Republican movement, the QAnon movement, that's kind of a 3.0. it's just spewing all of the hatred out onto the other side. But there's a lot on the left too, a lot of spewing of hatred out onto the right. And this is that kind of third person perspective where I'm good, it's the other people that are bad. But the other side is doing the exact same thing. I'm good and you're bad. And if you actually listen to both sides, they both say the same thing. They just substitute Democrat for Republican, but the words and the way that they're thinking are exactly the same. And then you get the more developed on both sides, Republican and Democrat, that are moving into fourth person perspective. And they're going, no, wait a minute, I need to be able to hold my own suffering. It isn't about the other people being bad or good. It's about me becoming authentic with who I am, deeply authentic. And that requires me not just to have principles that I live on that I'm going to hold to, but to have truly an unconditional loving witness. And if I'm going to have an unconditional loving witness for myself, enough to go into my shadow, that means my unconditional loving witness has to be unconditionally loving enough to love the other side. Oof. Because they are my shadow. I wouldn't be triggered by them if they weren't my shadow.
Yes.
And this is the place where a lot of people say, get away from me, Kim. I don't believe you. I'm right. They're wrong. Blah, blah, blah. It can't be true. I'm good. They're bad. I know it.
Yeah.
But if you're feeling like people are bad, I mean, the one thing that I say is if you have hatred, anger, and judgment over 40% of a population, perhaps it's not the 40% of the population. If I have a problem with my first lover, my second lover, my third lover, my fourth lover, my fifth lover, and they're all the same problem, it's not all my lovers. I need to look inward.
Well, what's the common denominator?
Yeah, what's the common denominator here? And if I can hate 40% of the American population or another population in Europe or anywhere, if I can be upset and triggered by that many people, the common denominator is me. So when we go into fourth person perspective, we get the true concept of celebrate diversity. It's not, oh, you and I are in the same need of celebrate diversity, but we don't like those people who don't. It's ironic, isn't it? If we celebrate diversity, then we need to celebrate the people that, aren't in our need.
And there, I guess also what I'm hearing too is that's part of the development, right? That's part of like the third part, like you have to go through third to get to fourth. So there's a piece of like, I want to say acceptance.
Yeah.
With people thinking that 40% of the world is bad against them or mad or whatever that is, I think that's been really awakening. There is certainly a younger part of me that wanted to be like, no, I'm going to change the world. And I find actually there's really just like, can I accept the world and have more acceptance and kind of cultivating this unconditional loving witness. That's been so deeply, profoundly powerful. Like the more I can admit and take responsibility for I want to call them like the uglier voices in me. And it's really challenging because I think that there's like a lot of cultural context of being bad or saying the wrong thing that needs to have a lot of shame. And so coming into truth with maybe these uglier pieces of myself that sometimes aren't even mine, are more of an introject from society even, or from my generational trauma, but they still live in me. And there's this like call, I think right now, to having radical responsibility of stepping into our honest truth and healing it so that we can be of more service to others. Yeah.
And that's the passion that arises as we start realizing this is not an enjoyable life. hating other people and kind of interiorly hating myself too, or judging others or judging myself, just living in that worldview is not a fulfilling way to live. So we go into deep radical self-acceptance, deep radical authenticity. And the transverse of that is that we accept deep radical authenticity in the world around us. But that's the power of the kind of like the hero shadow journey, right? To drop into that deep place and really wrestle with these belief systems, these ideologies, these personal messages, these messages about others externally, and clean it all up so that it doesn't operate in the field around us. And then when we're living a clear life and operating with clarity and unconditional love, that's how we kind of walk around. That creates a ripple effect out into the world. And then when we expand that to how we have organizational or, national, organizational, global subculture clashes, instead of them being clashes, we can hold this unconditional love and let the other one bounce around against the unconditional love. Then it becomes obvious. It's kind of like the Gandhi thing, right? He just said, no, we're not going to name call. We're not going to belittle. We're not even going to say somebody's worse than us or bad or anything. We're just going to stand solid in our presence and let them bounce around against us until they just can't stand their own ugliness anymore and quit.
Yeah.
And that's actually what heals a culture and a subculture, is making our love stronger than another's acting out hate. And that's the same thing that a good parent does. They don't get down and argue and fight with their child, right? They just hold clear, loving boundaries, and the child butts up against it, butts up against it, butts up against it, and finally wakes up.
I'm touched by this and laughing because my 6-year-old is getting very sophisticated in her bouncing up methods. And I'm always appreciating being reminded of holding the loving boundary. And it takes a deep level of like presence, and it takes a deep level of for me at least, like self-commitment to self-care, to make sure that I'm resourced to be the wall of China, of the loving wall of China.
Right.
The boundary pushing. I guess just noticing the time before we wrap up, I'd love to hear there's like with Mystics Rising, like I think like kind of what you were saying in the beginning, there's this call. I think there's a deep calling right now to having this more authentic relating and holding people. And I know we talked a lot about shadow work, but maybe you could talk a little bit about what you're bringing forth into the world. I've taken I think all the shadow classes that you have to date. And it's been some of the most profound transformation that I have ever experienced, and has really, I'm actually amazed at the resistance that I had to looking at my own shadow, and how painful it was to really relive and be with the pain of my being, and how transformational is. There's another teacher that I follow that said, what we touch fully dissolves. And so, creating this safe space for touching fully and allowing this to dissolve has just created such an expansion of space and liberated my consciousness in a way that I didn't think was possible, or I just had no concept of. And so I would love to hear what your plans are for when this episode comes out. It will be the beginning of 2022. What are your plans for this year, and maybe what your thoughts are on, I know we've talked a little bit about how important shadow work is, and seeing our projections are for people who are in helping professionals and are looking to rise up as these mystics and healers, especially people who are claiming to be light workers. And it's like, to be a true light worker, I think we've talked about, you have to really embrace and understand your darkness as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you want your light to be able to be strong enough, you have to be able to sit in hell.
Sit. You said that.
Otherwise, you're
said it so sweetly. You have to be sit in hell.
Otherwise, we're a fair weather light worker. The light's already there, and we're just hanging out, absorbing it, thinking we're the light, right?
Oh my God!
You know you're a light worker when you can sit in hell and still be the light, you know, and not just be the light in hell, but actually be present with the entire darkness at the same time. That's when you know you're empowered. That's when you know, if you're going to be a light worker, that would be what I would encourage people to strive for. Yeah.
So how can people start to embrace their shadow, Kim? Do you have any classes coming up?
Well, yeah, actually I do. I have classes, ongoing classes. I'm working on a website that's going to be dedicated just to shadow work. So that should be out in January, or might be out actually in December. So it might be out before this podcast even. So that hopefully will be there. If not, we will have it up on stages. But I'm in this transition point right now, but I will continue to do my shadow work. And I also have a meditation class that goes through all the developmental levels from a healthy meditative aliveness perspective. This is another thing that people do a lot of templates with. They'll template their meditation practice. And then that meditation practice can be, all the meditation practices are beautiful, but if you stay with the same one, then you're not growing. You're not growing vertically, I should say. You might grow horizontally. You might even grow in depth, but you're not going to grow vertically, because that template will hold you at that same developmental level. So what I'm providing is meditations that help create clarity at each developmental level, and are sequenced so that they move through each developmental level all the way up to the latest scored solid developmental levels that we have. So that's another thing that I do that I love.
You can find more recordings, classes, and events on mystics-rising.com.